All right, good afternoon, everybody. I might ask you to take your seats, grab your last cup of coffee, glass of water, and get ready for our first part of the session. All right, great. Thank you and welcome everybody to the Global Green Growth Institute headquarters. My name is Marshall Brown. I'm working in the carbon pricing unit here at GGGI. And today's event is a global event on the carbon transaction platform. Thank you very much for coming. We have a few different items on the agenda for today's session, starting with a little bit of an opening message from Dr. Frank Reisperman, going on to a little bit of a background about our carbon pricing activities and a recent survey in the area of carbon pricing in Article 6 that we've done, followed by a detailed explanation of the carbon transaction platform for all of those who are here to hear about it, a small break, and then we will have a panel discussion with our panelists who are here at the front of the room and online. Ambassador Jenny Kim, who is the Deputy Minister for Climate Change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Korea, Mr. Dita Gardera, Assistant Deputy Minister for Agriculture, Pharmacy, Tourism, and Tourism at the Ministry of Economic Affairs of Indonesia, and Mr. Milan Dugana, Undersecretary for the Ministry of Forests and Environments of Nepal. So without further ado, please let me welcome Dr. Frank Reisperman.
Thank you, Marshall, and once more welcome to GGGI for what is, if you like, the pre-event to our 10th anniversary reception a little bit later this afternoon, and also the final part of our consultation on this carbon transaction platform. So welcome to the people here in the room and the people online as well. I think we have now 32 people online for this event, and we're calling this a global event because it was actually preceded by 3 regional events. So my colleagues, Marshall, Vanella, and others actually did 3 different regional events in the different time zones in the last 24 hours to make sure everybody, at least in other parts of the world, could participate at a somewhat reasonable hour. And all that was to get feedback on this idea of a carbon transaction platform. If you don't know what the carbon transaction platform is, at the end of this session, you should know. We hope you will know. And what's more, you may have formed an opinion on whether this would be the kind of activity that GGGI should be involved in, and possibly whether this is also something that your country, if you're an ambassador or if you're working in a ministry, should be involved in or could be involved in, or what some of the key obstacles are to an effective Article 6 carbon market. Because I think as we started to get into this, many people have opinions on whether carbon transactions are a good idea or not, sometimes based on their experience with the previous carbon market under the Kyoto Protocol, the CDM market, or maybe if they're from the forest area, based on their experience with the voluntary carbon markets. But all of that is going to become the new Article 6 carbon market. And when we say Article 6, we mean Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And yes, there has been agreement on the rules for that, the headline level rules among the parties to the Paris Agreement in Glasgow in November last year. But very much more needs to be sorted out before there's actually a global carbon market. So in that interim period, there's a lot to be discussed, a lot of capacity to be built, a lot of countries getting ready. And that is what GGGI has done in the last few years with quite a few of our member countries. And indeed, when we saw late last year that there was a good chance that the rule book would be completed, we proposed in October last year to our council that possibly GGGI should expand its Article 6 carbon market related activities and explore whether to set up a carbon transaction platform. What that is, we'll tell you more about. But because, some people, including Jenny, for instance, who was our former colleague now at the ministry, she said, why would this be a good thing for GGGI to do, right? Isn't this far away from what we normally do in GGGI? So that is what we'll discuss this afternoon. What is it that we would do if we have a carbon transaction platform? So over the last few months, we put together a so-called options paper. We haven't given that out to you because it would be a lot of paper, but it is available if you scan that QR code on your piece of paper on the table. Then you can see the thick options paper that we drafted, and then we consulted, as Fenella will soon explain, with a number of the Article 6 experts in the different member countries. We did a survey, and we had these sessions in the last few days. So I think we're ready to share back with you the feedback that we've received from our member countries. And then we'll discuss in a bit more detail what the carbon transaction platform in our current proposed form is. We'll have a panel. And of course, for us, the goal would be to have real clarity among our members. And many of you here in the room are representing those members, so that by the time we have our next Council and Assembly meeting in October, we have a clear decision among our members whether GGI should indeed set up such a carbon transaction platform, and what it might mean for both buyers and sellers that are interested in engaging with each other, and how we could support them. So that's what we'll be doing this afternoon. That's the intro. So with that, do I give it back to you, Marshall, or should we have Fenella come? Okay.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever it is for everyone online. I think, yes, as described, we're doing around the world in 24 hours. So this is the session where we have most people actually present in the room. Last night, when we did the European and Africa regional session, it was just the team on that table there, all on laptops, and everyone else was online. And yeah, 6 o'clock this morning, even we weren't in the room, but we were all at home dialing into the Latin American one. So we have, what I want to do on this session is give you a little bit of why. How did we come about? How do we think about an idea of a carbon transaction platform? Why on earth would GGGI or us or myself be any good at doing this? What is the background? And then how we did the survey and some of the results of the survey. So what are we doing at the moment? In 2018-19, when I first moved from GGGI London to GGGI Seoul, I had I'd been to an aviation conference of all things, and I met a friend there who I'd known for years in the carbon market. And he said, God, we're trying to do something under Article 6. Yes, people were still just trying to do things even back then. He goes, we've got this fantastic project in Thailand and everybody's on board. And the Thai government said yes, and we've handed them all the documents, and then we heard nothing. And I don't know what the matter is. And I said, well, what I've learned having worked at an intergovernmental organization is governments rarely say no just for the hell of it. They say no because they don't know, they don't say anything because they don't know what they're meant to do with it. There were no rules, there was no governance in place. No one had a clue. So I said, it's not that they're not being enthusiastic about the trade, it's just that the governance isn't there. And then promptly came back here and thought, well, what do? We speak to governments. And what have I done for, now it's embarrassing here because I actually had a look to work out how long I've been in markets. And it's got to the stage, when someone does that bio and they put up how many years you've worked in the market. And I said, can you just bring it down a bit? Otherwise it makes me look really old. So yeah, it's more than 15 and that's all I'm saying. So I started looking at carbon in 2005 and then went on to Natixis in 2006, where they had the first European carbon fund. And this was the first fund globally that was buying effectively what will be Article 6 credits, but what were CDM transactions at that stage. And I was in the dealing room of the Natixis, heading the desk that looked after energy and therefore carbon as well. And we were looking at how to hedge that portfolio for the bank. So yeah, it's been going for a while, or it's rather, it was there, it went away, it came back again. And then 2018, and moving here, 2019, I spoke to Frank and said, why don't we try and put these two areas together? He said, go on then. So we did. And this is where we've ended up. We are now, I think we can safely say, I prefer the Heineken approach, which is probably, so we're probably the largest deliverer of technical assistance related to Article 6 globally. We have programs in over 10 countries, which you can see here. The nice map shows that that is a good global spread. And the idea is to help countries go beyond their NDCs to increase ambition. And we help on a learning by doing approach by setting up governance frameworks, helping them understand the market dynamics, putting in place and helping them with the MRV and working against methodologies, and then preparing and doing transactions. So not spend too long a time on it. Here we can see, oh, my flags have gone. That was the best bit of color on the slide. Never mind. So here you saw which countries they were in before. So our MATS program, which is sponsored by the Swedish Energy Agency, or Swedish government, representing the Swedish government for their buying commitments for carbon. We're working with them in Nepal and Cambodia, and that is similar to the CDM project level. In designing Article 6 policy approaches, that's with the Norwegian government. That is like a scaled up. That is transformational change by actually looking at national policies that will be put in place that could generate carbon credits. So very exciting. That would be a first to market if we get through what we think we're going to get through in the next year or so. I'm looking at Jimena, our global project leader for program leader for that. And that is in Indonesia and Vietnam, Senegal and Morocco. And then the third one, which we always say, it's got such a long name, we won't even spell out the acronym, we just call it SPARK, is more a capacity building and readiness program. It's funded by the German government, but the important thing here is it's not actually saying, okay, part of the program is you have to do a trade. It's just getting ready for a trade and making sure if people want to do trades, which the Thai government are now saying, yes, we want you to help us actually do a trade. And so, in fact, all of them are. I think the only one is Colombia is saying, okay, let's just make sure that we can meet our NDC. Yeah, but general great enthusiasm for trading there. So that gives you an idea of what GGGI is doing. So now that we have the base for doing it, so we thought of the carbon transaction platform, and then we thought, okay, well, we can't just sort of come up with an idea out of the blue because we felt like it and go, yeah, I'm sure everyone would think it's a great idea. We better go and do some research and some consultation on this. So as Frank has explained, we've done this first draft options paper. It was shared with staff. We've done, it's gone to our MPSC committee. And then we've conducted this survey in April. Further to that, we've had the webinars, this event here, and then the one we're not telling Frank about, which is a drinks party in Bonn. So that's to catch the stragglers who all said, I'm so sorry, I can't join the webinars, I'm in Bonn. It's like, okay, well, we'll come to Bonn. So we're picking up the last ones there. And then in July, we have the MPSC meeting, and then obviously we hope then that the design has been really thoroughly consultated with all of our members and will go to the council and assembly in October. So what does the survey say? So the survey has, why did we do it? We felt as well that it was also, we needed first-hand views. What I found recently is there are many intergovernmental organizations who are talking about doing Article 6 work, doing capacity building, and saying that they know what the countries think. But then what I find is they're always asking me, and I'm saying, well, when we had a call with UAE last week, or when we were last in email contact yesterday with Nepal, or Sweden said this, and we find that our natural role really is hearing what governments are saying. So we wanted to use that in some level of survey. Also, there are no other surveys. We did have a look. We said, okay, are we repeating work that others have done? This is a fast moving market, so we need to, they'll constantly be needed, but there weren't any others in the market. And this was clearly to inform the design of the carbon transaction platform. So 29 of our member and partner countries took part. There were 77 people, gender balanced, almost perfectly, not quite. And what we found was that 76% of them are likely to be sellers, a small percent buyers, and some both. I'm going to race through a few of these because we're on a tight schedule to get to the panel discussion, but of course the PowerPoints are available afterwards. So 93% said they were looking to participate in Article 6. And the 7% that didn't, it might be interesting to say that it's not because they say because we don't want to trade. It's because they just say we don't know enough at the moment and we want to learn more. Do you think the country could benefit from trading? Nobody said, no, I can't see a benefit. Everybody said, yes, I see a benefit, or I'm not sure. We need to work out what's happening with CDM transition and need to learn more about it. So we get a big thumbs up for enthusiasm for Article 6. The next one, and you've got to read this one a little bit carefully. What is the readiness? So is the government ready to engage? This is not, is the government ready to trade? This is the government ready to engage, to talk, to learn about, to have the capacity building, to set up the governance frameworks needed? 41%, yes, we want to engage now, not later. We want to start the process and get everything set up now. Do you have a strong understanding of Article 6? Now, at this point, I would temper this answer with, remember, the people we surveyed. The people we surveyed was we rang up our country teams and said, find someone who has heard the word Article 6 before, who can actually participate in the study or not be a don't know the whole way through. Find someone who's heard the word Article 6, we'll interview them. So even out of all the people who are the Article 6 focals in all 29 countries, only 41% of them say that their governments have a strong understanding. So you can see the need for capacity building there. Are you concerned about risks? This is a really important one. Regulatory uncertainty. I think this is the rule book's there, but then underneath the rule book, what is the translation of the understanding of the rule book? How are all of the procedures and points underneath the rules going to be used? Market dynamics, price volatility could well link back to the CDM, the inequality of buyer and seller. I'll go on to that in a moment. And then capacity, lots of capacity needed. So a lot of people concerned about the risks. What's the private sector readiness? And I find this one really interesting. So if you are a government, we asked them effectively, has anyone from your private sector approached you and said, will you authorize this transaction? Or how do I buy something? Remember, 17% of the respondents were buyers. How do I buy something? I want to buy something that's correspondingly adjusted. They've had a lot of people approach them. So this was, I'm just sorry, the graphic isn't completely coming up. So here it was 66%, so 2/3 of the respondents had, yes, we've been contacted. Which sectors, which I think is interesting, energy and AFLU, the most keen, so forestry, land-based sector. And then who has approached you? So this is quite an interesting one. There might be a few faces in the room who might recognize a few of these. So you've got here, you've got Switzerland, you've got Norway. You might have a few of those are a bit too small even for me to read. Hold on, I've got my glasses on because I printed it out here. So we've got Switzerland, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Sweden, Norway, Germany, although we know Germany's not a buyer, so I think that's related to a capacity building program. And then some who preferred not to say. There were some who said private sector had approached them for purchasing. And then who's engaged in pilots? So you can see Australia, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the Switzerland Click Foundation program, probably the largest at the moment. And Germany shown there, but again, I stress Germany is not a buyer as they're bound by EU ETS rulings. So 52% are not engaged in pilots. And where do people want the money? Where is the assistance needed? So financial assistance for the technical infrastructure, what we call the governance program. So this is set the regulations, the strategy, the processes, the procedures in place so that we can say yes to that guy who handed us his whole project and said, could you authorize this? Then pilot projects, go find more projects. We want more projects to be able to see a larger flow of carbon finance. And capacity building for understanding the markets taken as a base. And on that, we asked everyone, have you participated in forums or discussions? So this poor guy on the left, 38% on the desert island on their own, haven't, but 62% have. A lot run by the UNFCCC, COP side events, regional workshops, or bilateral discussions and pilots. But 100% would like more exchange and more opportunities to discuss with others. I think that was even brought up in New Zealand's comments this morning, which was more discussion is always beneficial. So here, priority areas, regulation, get a wider bunch of stakeholders involved, and then develop national rules and procedures to select and approve the project. So the procedures and rules. And then coming to the end here, this was important to us. We felt GGGI's membership naturally supports an awful lot of developing and emerging economies. And one criticism that has been put by smaller economies, by economies that missed out on the CDM, by vulnerable economies, small island states, is always there's not equal opportunities. There's not an equal table to sit at. The buyers dictate the price. It's too early to know that we don't know enough. There's a lack of capacity. It's the other side. The buyers are always the one with all the information. We don't know. So here, what you're seeing is only 14% of those interviewed feel that it is an equal playing field between buyers and sellers. So what do we conclude? More capacity building needed, broader engagement across government stakeholders. The Article 6 should be mainstreamed into economic planning, long-term, the LT-LEDs, etc. And of course, one advantage for GGGI is we do all of that as well. So we're able in-house to do that coordination. And relevance of the even access of information. And that's one of the key reasons that we feel that the carbon transaction platform would be useful, as we feel it addresses this. I shall stop there and pass back to Marshall. Thank you. Did I go?
Thank you, Fenella. I think actually we'll now move on to the presentation for Frank about the carbon transaction platform.
Thank you. Only one more presentation. After that, I think we propose that you all get a chance to share more what your views are and ask questions and listen to the panel as well. But yes, that was the background, if you like. So we already, of course, saw some of this coming since, as Fenella explained, we have been working with a number of countries on Article 6, and we are working with pretty much all our members. We worked with about 30 countries on their improved NDCs for the Paris Agreement. So we have a pretty fair understanding what's going on in the countries, what issues are discussed, and who is ready and who is not. So it's on that basis that we were saying, we think we can play potentially quite an important role in facilitating these carbon transactions among our members. So that is the essence of the carbon transaction platform. And of course, the background of that is that there is just not enough money flowing to climate action. There's not enough money flowing in the developed countries. There's certainly not enough money flowing in the developing countries. And in addition to how can we all get to net zero, the number 2 topic discussed at every single COP is, why isn't there more money coming from developed countries to developing countries? What about the 100 billion that you promised us a long time back? Well, actually, 100 billion is only a small part of what's needed. There will be a very much larger amount of money required to all get to net zero. And it's not going to come from official development assistance or from that climate finance that you can get from the Green Climate Fund. We do need additional flows of money. It'll have to come to a large extent from the private sector. And one key way to meet this gap, this very much larger amount of money that has to flow to climate action, particularly in developing and emerging economies, could come from carbon trading. That's the underlying premise. But why a carbon transaction platform then? Why don't Indonesia and Korea just do a deal together directly, right? Why do countries not simply, as Fenella suggested also, come up with projects and agree them? Well, actually, Article 6, we think, is an improvement over the Kyoto Protocol era CDMs, but they do mean that there is a higher participation burden. For countries to agree on corresponding adjustments is not that easy. If you are maybe Cambodia, if you're here in the room as well, maybe the NDC commitments are not as difficult for some of the least developed countries. But Indonesia has a very high commitment to reduce their own NDC. So the decision of whether Indonesia has something to sell and what it is that they might want to trade to Korea is not an easy one to make. So that is why there is a pretty high participation burden for engaging in Article 6. And of course, if there was one criticism on the CDMs from, say, environmental groups, is that some of those CDMs, people had very low confidence that they would actually reduce emissions. So having strong monitoring, reporting, and verification systems, having strong MRVs in all the participating countries is critical as well. That's also an important investment that countries have to make. And yes, if we want to address that information imbalance, then we also need to make sure that there is more of a level playing field, that all countries have access to the same kind of information and that information flows freely. And yes, a lot of developing countries feel that the markets so far have been driven by buyers and that we haven't seen much of a level playing field in terms of negotiating. So all these are, if you like, barriers to effective Article 6 trading that we are aiming to address through this carbon transaction platform. So what is it then? Well, if you like, in simple ways, what Fenella was describing so far, the technical assistance that we have already been doing would be continued. So there's basically no change in terms of our, what we now like to call readiness activities to get countries ready for a trade. The primary new thing that we are proposing is that we could actually facilitate transactions. And the way we think we can facilitate transactions is through trust funds. That is not our own innovation. The World Bank in those previous markets has been using similar trust funds. The ADB will set up a trust fund. In essence, that means that if Norway, let's say, that we are discussing this with, would like to have a number of transactions in those countries where we have been doing the readiness work, it might be a lot easier for them if they could pass that money to GGI, to a trust fund. We could help facilitate some of those transactions, and indeed they could flow through that trust fund. So GGI would not be the buyer. It would still be Norway buying from whichever country is interested in having such a transaction with Norway, but we would facilitate such a transaction, and the mechanism we would use is a trust fund. That's the simple answer. We already have trust funds at GGI, but so far we only have basically technical assistance trust fund. We have agreed with the Korean government, what the previous government called the Korea Green New Deal Fund. It provides money to us that we use as project preparation funding. So those are relatively small trust funds that fund GGI's activities. We also have another trust fund where we facilitate Korea's engagement with the East Asia part of the ASEAN, where we in a way are the manager of those funds that Korea provides to Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So that's a little bit different role. And for these, what we would call carbon purchasing trust funds, our primary role would be indeed pass through. If we help facilitate an agreement between Korea and Indonesia, Korea could put the funding there, or after Korea and Indonesia have agreed on the terms and signed the government-to-government agreement, GGI could help develop projects in Indonesia, as we are currently doing, and they could be offered in Korea to the private sector who could buy those credits. So there you can already see some of the advantages. Some of those credits could be offered directly to a single government buyer, like the Swedish Energy Agency, or they could be placed in the trust fund and be available to 20 different private sector entities who could then purchase them. But they would still basically flow directly from Indonesia to the private sector buyers under that government-to-government agreement, where the governments have agreed on the corresponding adjustments, and the money would flow the other way around. So that's the heart of the carbon transaction platform as we see it today. Of course, as this is all relatively new, we also think that a number of our GGI members as buyers and sellers engaging in this business would actually help develop the global market. A lot of the terms under the Article 6 rulebook are not very clear. So we have a quite large group of countries interested to engage. And we think that if we have a number of transactions coming through here, that will help clarify the market. Or you could even say, if important countries like Korea and Indonesia can agree on terms, smaller countries that may not have the capacity to figure all these things out for themselves might say, okay, that sounds like a reasonable set of conditions to us, we'll join. Can we copy? Can we share? Can we share information on how these deals could be done through the carbon transaction platform that we aim to set up if the council agrees? So that's a summary of what I just tried to explain to you. There's the readiness facility under which we would continue our technical assistance on the one side. And then there are these carbon purchasing trust funds where we do fund management, transaction preparation, and transaction facilitation. That's the two key sets of activities. And in fact, the readiness is what we are already doing as technical assistance right now, but we'd be very happy to expand that to new countries. So if you're either interested as a buyer or as a seller, we'd be perfectly happy to say, how can we expand this activity to benefit more of our member countries? Fenella sits there and saying, I'm open for business on that one. And on the other side, the carbon trust funds, because it is a bit different than what we have been doing today. That is actually the key decision that we want all of our members to think about carefully and to see in October when our council meets, whether that's something that our council will authorize us to start. So we're not quite open for business on that. But we know that for some of our members, such as Norway, that have looked into this most carefully, they have asked us, can we please set up such a trust fund as GGI? Because for them, they can see the benefits very clearly. For others, I think this is the time to explore and make sure that that is clear for everybody. We do also have members like Denmark who think that they don't want to trade, that they can achieve all those emission reductions that they have promised, and they've promised 70% reduction by 2030. They think they can achieve that domestically, so they don't need to trade. Other countries like Korea, we were here, we know that the president decided to increase the percentage in the NDC from 32 to 40 just before COP last year. But the general sentiment in the country was that that would be very difficult or impossible to achieve just domestically. So that introduces the need for trade. So I think Korea and many other countries are going to find themselves in that boat, are going to have to find internationally transferred mitigation outcomes to achieve their NDCs. And we all know that the NDCs aren't necessarily ambitious enough to meet the 1.5 degree goal as it stands. So if there is more money flowing, that can also be the opportunity for countries to have more confidence that they can make their NDCs more ambitious. Right, I think that's probably, we are all so saying, so how much in terms of tons could potentially be involved in this? And I think Fenella had put 100 million tons down before, but she got slightly more modest and put XXX for now, because it's very difficult to try and see how much could be involved depending on the interest and enthusiasm of both buyers and sellers. But we think that this is something that is not some small thing on the margin. We think that this could be a big thing that could really have a large impact. That's frankly why we are engaged in this. We believe this could be in the interest, particularly of our developing and emerging market economy members who are struggling to find money for climate action. And yes, what I also like is that it will benefit both our buyer and seller countries as well. I think that's almost already, my clicker is not really working. There you come, which is pretty much if you at the end of this said, okay, so what is changing if we have a carbon transaction platform from what we are already doing? Then we're trying to summarize that here. We are already providing technical assistance, but at the moment, if you like, if between Sweden and Norway, the examples that Fenella gave, there is an interest in a trade, they would do that directly. We are not involved. And of course, in future, it would still be those two countries who decide on the trade, but we could facilitate, pass through, do the fund management through the carbon purchasing trust fund if we're able to set those up. All right, well, I think the people who prepare my slides were wanting to make sure that we don't forget, because this repeats a little bit what we have already said. But underneath the readiness facility, we do these kind of things. It's the technical assistance and capacity building. We help originate and do matchmaking between countries. And we think that it would be used to a knowledge exchange. Oops, that was too quick this time. And under the carbon trust funds, you've already seen those words: fund management, transaction preparation, and transaction facilitation. If you have questions on that, I'm sure we can get back to that during the panel as well. We do think there will be clear benefits to buyers and sellers of such a platform. And frankly, that is what I like. To be honest, our business model as a multilateral organization right now is very much ODA based. We provide grants from developed countries to developing countries. And sometimes when there are other budget needs, it's clear that the priorities of that ODA money can be a little bit fragile or vulnerable, let's say. So here we have actually a business model where we think there's a very clear interest on both buyer and seller sides to have those kind of transactions be realized, which I think provides a very healthy basis for GGI to support all of our member countries. With that, I think you may have questions, but we thought in our wisdom that we would not do Q&A right now, but that actually we would have the panel, and then we have ample time for you also to have your questions, after the panel, after the first few questions. I think there will be time for that. Well, I was going to let Marshall do the emceeing for what we do in the next 5 minutes. So come over here, please.
Yes, so at this time, I think we'll take a very short break, maybe 5 to 10 minutes for everybody to take a little breath, absorb all of that information that you just heard. So grab a cup of coffee or water, and then we'll come back and have a panel discussion on those topics. Thank you. Right, if we could take the next minute or two to collect your things and get back to your seats, we'll get the panel discussion started.
Can we bring our remote participants online just onto the screen rather than looking at ourselves? Milan. Ah, brilliant. Hello, Milan. How are you?
Hello, Fenella and colleagues. I'm good. How are you? Thank you.
Very well, thank you. Right, let me introduce everyone. Welcome back. I hope you've all managed to take a little break, get yourself a drink. If you're lucky, there might be some biscuits left. I don't know. We've been up early this morning, so we might have whipped as many as we could. Right. So this part of the programme, we're coming into the third part of the programme, which is going to be a panel discussion. And the aim of this panel discussion is to really bring out the thoughts of buyers and sellers in the market, real practical people who want to buy and sell, and try and match that to what we've heard in the survey and what we've proposed in the carbon transaction platform. So it could go in any direction, is what I'm saying. It could, we're pretty free form. We've got a few questions and thoughts to put forward, but let me, without any further gabbling on, actually introduce the panel. So first on my left is Ambassador Jenny Kim, who is Deputy Minister for Climate Change in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Government of Korea. Next, I have Pak Dida, or Dida, Mr. Dida Gardera, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister within the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Government of Indonesia. And finally, I have online joining us from Kathmandu, Mr. Milan Dungara, who is the Undersecretary with the Ministry of Forests and Environment in the Government of Nepal. Welcome, Milan. Right, so we did do a little preparation for this, so it's not completely off the hoof. I did actually ask our participants a few questions and to frame it a little bit for the first intervention. So I think we will plan to go around the panel members for reflections and thoughts and answers to these questions. Then we will open it up to all of you. So get ready with your thoughts and your questions. And then we'll maybe allow and have a little bit of questioning between the panel members and also in amongst and with yourselves. So if I can start, the questions that we posed to our panelists were, why is Article 6 important from your perspective? Then we asked, what is your government doing to catalyse trading? Where do you see the need for more action? And finally, what do you think about the carbon transaction platform that has been presented by Frank today? So Jenny, may I turn to you, please, for reflections?
Press button. Yes, thank you, Fenella. Before I answer to your question, first of all, I thank GGGI for organizing this very useful and meaningful opportunity to discuss about carbon trading issues, carbon transaction issues. And also, it's a great pleasure for me to meet my previous colleagues at this beautiful conference room again. It's always a great happiness to be back to my home. Yes. So good to see your colleagues. Really, I really thank my previous GGGI colleagues, my colleagues for working very hard for green growth all over the world. So let me go back to your question, Fenella. First of all, let me start with Korea's NDC under the Paris Agreement. So we all know that Paris Agreement requires every individual country to reduce greenhouse gas emission. So it means every country is working very hard to reduce the emission. And Korea is also, we developed very ambitious nationally determined contribution, NDC, which was submitted at the end of last year. So Korea's NDC is basically 40% reduction from 2018 level by 2030. So in 2018, we reached a peak, more than around like 727 million CO2 ton. And then in 2030, we must reach at around 436 million ton. So theoretically, if we calculate every year from 2018 to 2030, we have to reduce 4.1 percentage point of our emission. So it's a huge challenge. Frankly speaking, our Korean economy is very manufacturing oriented structure. And also our key competitive industry is energy intensive industries such as like semiconductors, automobiles, shipbuilding, electronical products, and chemicals and refinery as well. So Korean business sector, manufacturing sector, they have huge concerns about NDC implementation. Thanks to the COVID-19, 2019-2020, Korea was successful to reduce the emission. However, unfortunately, in 2021, the number is going up again. So we are in the face of huge challenge. And when Korea designed NDC by 2030, we considered so-called internationally transferred mitigation outcome, because many Korean companies, they argued that they have invested a lot in promoting energy efficiency, in introducing new technology and new equipment. Therefore, they have very small room to work further, which means if they try to reduce greenhouse gas emission, it must be very, very expensive. And that's why our industry sector people, they are asking Korean government to consider any other opportunity to reduce emission less expensively. That's why Korean companies, they want to find opportunities in other overseas. Therefore, in Korea's NDC, we introduced certain, not big, small portion of ITMO, internationally transferred mitigation outcome utilization. Therefore, every year when Korea is implementing the emission reduction plan in accordance with the NDC, we consider small portion of the reduction are taking place in other countries, and Korea is going to bring that mitigation outcome to Korea's NDC implementation. It means, for example, if any Korean companies are working in Vietnam to reduce emission, and if Vietnam government agrees, then that emission reduction results will be calculated to Korea, and Vietnam is going to agree about corresponding adjustment. That's why now our Korean government is working very hard to make so-called climate change cooperation agreement with many partner countries. So my role is to set up a legal framework regarding climate cooperation, including carbon transaction or carbon action with counterpart countries. So we have a climate change cooperation agreement with Vietnam. And now we are discussing, we almost agreed the language with Peru. And we are discussing with Sri Lanka and Myanmar. And also we have a plan to drastically increase the countries we are initiating discussion. That's why my conclusion is Article 6, particularly 6.2 cooperative approach is very important and can play a key role in Korea's NDC implementation. And particularly in this session, I really want to hear the views from the developing countries because most probably Korea is going to be the buyer's side. But I want to understand better the views and positions from the seller's side as well, because under the Paris Agreement, every country must reduce the emission. Therefore, even developing countries, even Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, because they have, all of them, they have very ambitious NDC. I'm wondering whether they are very proactive to sell the credits because they want to use those credits for their NDC implementation first. I understand the position. I mean, I can make a guess very easily that Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Nepal, their priority must be their own NDC implementation. So if Korea, countries like Korea who wants to buy credits and asking corresponding adjustments to the counterpart governments, how can we make a smooth, good arrangement which will be mutually productive? Yes. So Article 6 is very important, and Korean government is working hard to set up legal framework with counterpart countries, and also we really want to make a win-win arrangement. Not because Korea, I don't want that Korea is just buying the credit and then solving their NDC implementation. That's not the way we are going to pursue. We really want to find a win-win solution, which is mutual, which is beneficial for both countries. So where can we find such mutually productive zones, and what measures should be taken in order to achieve that goal? I really want to hear many views from our GGGI partner countries in this session. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you so much for that. Straight to the heart of the issue there. Well done. You've done it now. Opens up the conversation. Well, straight on, Pagdida. Please, I think not only am I looking forward to hearing from yourself and from Milan afterwards, but I think Jenny is with bated breath listening. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Vanilla. Good afternoon, and also good morning and good evening from the colleague in the Zoom room. First of all, thank you for GGI for inviting me to visit GGGI headquarters. I believe my sixth president already also have an office in here, perhaps. As Her Excellency Jenny already mentioned that, of course, since 2007, Indonesia has a leading role in the climate change. So we are, of course, put the priority for achieving our commitment in NDC. But we believe also we can raise our ambition. So that's why our target is to reduce 29% by 2030. But if we can do together, we have international cooperation, we can increase to 41% emission reduction by 2030. So, yeah, Article 6, we believe that this is not only can support Indonesia in achieving NDC, but also it means as well a collaboration among all the countries to save our Earth. Yeah, and we have our government have calculated that we just rely on our own budget. Yeah, we cannot fulfill our commitment. So that's why we need all stakeholders, including international stakeholders, to support our NDC efforts to achieve the 29% of emission reductions. So that's why in forum of UNFCCC, we actively engage in the Article 6 negotiation, and also that's why our government as well exercising one of them with GGGI how to do Article 6 while we still waiting the more practical rules, which hopefully in Egypt will be finalized. So if the all the procedural mechanism already put in place, we are ready to go to the Article 6, particularly the Article 6.2. Yeah, of course, we have experience in protocol Kyoto era. We gain some benefit, but we're not certified for the CDM. So hopefully with this Paris Agreement, we can gain much more benefit for Indonesia. That's the benefit from the Article 6 should also promote many options. We just discussed that there is other potential technology mentioned about green hydrogen or what else. Yeah, we can have room for maneuver if we have enough fund for doing that. We can increase together with all countries, not only to maintain below 2 centigrades, but below 1.5 centigrades. So I think Article 6 is quite important for Indonesia. So we won't take opportunity to get the benefit to for the international transport mitigation outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Pagdida. And yes, of course, we've already been discussing exciting ideas, whether it's green hydrogen or other matters. And you raised again a further very valid point, the conditional and unconditional targets of an NDC and how they should be interpreted between buyers and sellers. So let me move swiftly on. Milan, I will say thank you so much. You've been most patient online. I'd like to turn to you. Can you give us the view from Nepal? Is it the same as Indonesia, different? How are you viewing things?
Thank you, Fenella, and thank you, GGGI, for organizing and inviting this very important workshop or discussion in a very right time, because we are discussing a lot about the carbon markets and Article 6. So Your Excellencies and all the colleagues from different parts of the world, just allow me to greet you from rainy Kathmandu here in Nepal. So Fenella, before answering your questions, let me thank GGGI for all the support we get through the maths program here in Nepal to move on the Article 6 initiatives and all other supports that's technically happening in Nepal, and the colleagues from GGGI are very much willing to support us in various aspects of the carbon market here. So regarding your first question, why it is the Article 6 matters us and how important it is, I answer that in a two aspect. Being a developing countries or being a least developed countries and the mountainous countries, Nepal is very vulnerable to the climate change. So it is very important to tackle the climate change issue very seriously. For that, as per the Paris Agreement, we need to focus our steps, our works towards getting the 1.5 degree target. So globally, the Article 6 gives the opportunity to the countries to enhance their mitigation outcomes. That is important for us as well. And domestically, for Nepal, it is important for us in multiple of sectors like climate financing and capacity building and cooperation between the countries to enhance the technology and to get the good outcome in the NDCs that we put forward in the UNFCCC, and as well as the rising emission in the Nepal's context as well. Furthermore, through the Article 6, we can engage private sectors in the domain as well. So it is not all the governments doing the climate action. It's the private sectors also doing the climate action, because there is a possibility of markets. There is a possibility of financing the projects and financing the outcomes that we get as emission reduction. So that is also important, and it is possible through Article 6, I guess. So, and then in your next question, what Nepal government is doing to catalyze those kind of marketing and to implement the Article 6 mechanism here. We have a very good experience with the clean development mechanism in Nepal, as well as we are one of the countries that will implement the RED Plus programs as well. So we have two kind of carbon trading ongoing. Well, it was going, or RED Plus is still going. The CDM is a little bit of stock nowadays due to this Article 6 mechanism. So we can enhance from the base of those kind of engagements that we are taking before. So Government of Nepal is taking policy initiatives in the carbon market. So Government of Nepal legally can transact carbon trade to the countries or to the institutions beyond the country. So we have some legal provisions that is based on the CDM mechanism as well. So we can just build on those legal provisions to meet the Article 6 engagement as well. So we are also working on the governance framework of the Article 6 mechanism with the assistance of the GGGI and other our partners. So how do we implement the Article 6 needs in the governance, like authorization or approving the projects and the corresponding adjustment, those kind of technical things? How do we implement those kind of things, and which government agency will just take that responsibility during the course of time? So those kind of initiative is going on here in Nepal as well. And also the enhancement of capacity of the institutions. Like in our NDCs, we have various sectoral targets in emission reduction. So we need to build the capacity of all those sectoral ministries or sectoral organizations, not only the Ministry of Forest and Environment, which overall sees the climate affairs, but we also need to enhance the capacity of those sectoral organizations as well. So that kind of work is being done here in Nepal domestically within the government and from the assistance of the organizations like GGGI. And regarding the carbon transaction platform, it is very good initiative. I like to thank, or I like to welcome this initiative from the GGGI, and it has a very good opportunity for the potentially seller countries. I think, because the buyers, they have very least to do, I think, in this case, because the sellers has to comply with a lot of rules of Article 6. So we have to enhance our capacity to meet those rules and regulations of Article 6 transactions. So that will help us to enhance our capacity as well. So, and we also have experience with the World Bank and Red Plus. Similar kind of trust fund is there, and similar kind of readiness program is there. So this is really beneficial, especially for those countries that is potentially thinking themselves as a seller and a project developer, and the emission getting the benefit, financial benefit from the emission reduction. So that is a very good initiative. I'd like to thank GGGI, and we are very much hoping and looking forward to make this happen. I think I'll stop here for now, and if you have some questions, I'll get back to you later too. Thank you. Back to you.
That's fantastic, Milan. Thank you so much for that contribution. And yes, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, FCPF, is the Red Plus trust fund that has been run for many years by the World Bank, with a readiness facility as well. And you're speaking the GGGI carbon pricing language there by saying the legal regulation needs to go in place, the governance frameworks with the capacity building, the ability to actually authorize trades. Okay, so let's just take a stock take here. So far on our survey, on our CTP paper, on everything else, the paper's been shared with over 400 people in our member and partner countries. We have had, this is now the 4th stage of the webinars and live consultation. We've had over 120 people in the last 24 hours, less than. On the regional webinars, we now have the last, well, around about 100 people here today. So we've heard directly from, effectively buyers and sellers in the market what is really needed. So I'm going to ask for first reflections from you, Jenny, as you were asking specifically. I want to hear what the sellers are saying, and now you've heard it. And then I would like to turn to the room and get any further reflections, or if Frank has any immediate thoughts. So Jenny, from what you've heard from Milan and Pakdida, what are your thoughts? Do you think we can do some great trades?
Actually, carbon transaction activities is not simply about trading carbon. Before trading carbon, it includes a series of many multiple activities. And in that process, actually, as Frank mentioned in his speech, money and technology are moving around. Yes, so I see that before we are talking about carbon transaction or credit buying and selling, we may talk about technology and finance flow, promoting technology and finance flow from developed to developing countries first, because Now, okay, I mean, before national government is setting up some legal or regulatory framework about carbon transaction, I see actually private sector is the more running front, because many multinational companies, they already announced that they will achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, 2035, 2040, before 2050. And now Korean companies, they start asking where they can find good areas for voluntary carbon reduction activities. Because, for example, Samsung Electronics, they really want to reduce, they really want to strengthen their activities in developing countries in order to support their net zero plan. So in that process, actually, when particularly companies are moving around, I think developing countries, they can find a huge opportunity to invite investment. Money and technology are coming to their country. So trading carbon, trading credits, that, as already our Indonesia colleague mentioned, then needs quite more actually technical works. That's why our colleagues in Bonn, they are now discussing about very, very specific technical rules and modalities. But if we really want to work together at the global level, I believe, now at this stage, we are more focusing on partnership. So how to move, how to support money and technology moving towards developing countries from developed world. I think we must focus on that matter first. Then, as we have more accurate rules and modalities from UNFCCC negotiations, then we can further discuss about how to trade carbons. But at this stage, as Fenella, you already mentioned, the capacity building of developing countries regarding full understanding about so-called ITMO, and also carbon transaction, and also MRV system, that's really important, because strong MRV system and strong MRV system, that's the backbone of future carbon transaction. So in that sense, capacity development is really important. And also, at the same time, because GGGI mentioned you are going to be a good facilitator of carbon transaction. I'm wondering whether GGGI also is considering to arrange carbon transaction among private sectors, not among governments. You said no. Okay, yeah. Well, maybe Frank has different views. Yeah, because I know there are private companies, they really want to find a good place for carbon transaction before government is taking any actions. So maybe Frank, you can, or Fenella?
Yes, I'll pass it to Frank. You probably saw one of us nod and one of us shake our head then. So you can tell that this thing's in the design phase, can't you? Yeah, we are saying the same thing, but in different ways. Frank, over to you.
So there's a number of very interesting points, I think. Here this afternoon, we talk about carbon transactions if they are freestanding, but in practice, of course, they are embedded in a way in our larger work. And that is why GGGI is interested in them as well. Because yes, the capacity building that we're talking about is in a way part and parcel of some of the capacity building on climate change, on NDCs that we do in general. It fits in there. And indeed, we can't imagine just going into a country and discussing a carbon trade next month and making a deal. Rather, the programs we've had supported by Norway and Sweden are several years of building capacity, setting up the government's arrangements and so on. But even if all that is done, we see these carbon transactions as components of our normal green investment work. We're looking at a renewable energy project in industrial parks in Ethiopia, which maybe are marginally attractive. And by adding in the carbon transaction, something that's a marginally attractive project could become an attractive project. So it's not a carbon trade by itself, but it's a project on investing renewable energy in Ethiopia's industrial parks, which is furthered, which is helped by the additional money that the carbon transaction can bring. And the same for waste management projects or others, projects that are green investment projects that we are developing anyway, and that others are developing as well, where carbon transaction can become an interesting component. But of course, then governments have to decide whether they are indeed willing to have corresponding adjustments. And I think Jenny asked a very important question that hasn't been directly answered by our colleagues from Indonesia or Nepal, but let me try to give you the theoretical answer in a way, right? So yes, if currently the cheapest possible emission reductions in a selling country are available, of course, the country should use those for their own NDC, right? And we've probably all seen these marginal abatement cost curves. So you see in a marginal abatement cost curve, and you can say, well, your own NDC has to fit in the cheap part, you know, and then using that, you can also see what in a way the minimum price is that a selling country would have to ask to make sure that you don't sell the low-hanging fruit, but that you sell what is above that. So if in Indonesia, I don't know the numbers, but if Indonesia has to meet its whole NDC and the most expensive reduction price is, let's say, $30 a ton, and if in Korea it already costs close to 100, then there is a lot of scope to do transactions that are in both Indonesia's and Korea's benefit. So yes, Indonesia shouldn't sell the cheap carbon reduction measures, they need them themselves. But as Pagdita was saying, partly to finance their climate action, they need more money to flow in. So what would be expensive emission reductions, high quality, high priced emission reductions for Indonesia could still be attractive for the Korean private sector. So that is in a way the space. I think we see a lot of misunderstanding where people talk about really cheap carbon transactions. Of course, it wouldn't be in Indonesia's interest to sell carbon transactions at $5 a ton and then have to reduce their own emissions at a higher price. But if the other way around, if the analysis shows that Indonesia can meet its obligations and there is still scope for reductions that are still attractive from a Korean perspective, that should be the trading space, right? And I think it is analyzing those options. Those are the real differences between buying and selling countries, where there is a mutually interesting proposal for both countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. And yeah, the economic efficiencies are very important. And one thing in the rules now, which is much, much clearer under Article 6, the story that has to be told about how and why the emissions reduce the ITMOs generated are additional, and they will create transformational. There's a lot of stress from buyers on the transformational change. So you're framing it in terms of technology, and that there is that and other options. People don't want to buy just a credit. Well, I mean, everyone has a different story, but generally everyone we're dealing with doesn't want to just buy a credit. They want to help and enhance countries through their transformational change. Now, enough of us gabbling away at the front of the room here. It's time to turn to the room and ask if you have any questions or thoughts or reflections. What do you think of the carbon transaction platform? Is it a good idea? Do you have any questions about it? Anything unclear? So I'd love to see a show of hands. There's a roaming mic that will come round instantly by your side if you are ready. And anyone who's joining remotely, I see we have Milan and 49 friends online. So if any of them wish to ask a question, we can take those just as easily. If you would like to stick up your virtual hand, then please do. So any thoughts or reflections from the room? Yes, please, sir. If you wouldn't mind, because I'm very bad at reading long distance name labels, if you could say your name and organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. My name is Rodrigo Coronel. I'm the ambassador of Nicaragua here in this beautiful country of Korea. Also, I'm having trouble reading your name from here, so don't worry.
Fenella.
First of all, it's wonderful that we're having this conversation. Even if for some of us it's just way out of our head, what we're talking about, just the mere fact that we're having the conversation is what matters. So I applaud the effort that GGGI is doing to have the conversation and make people understand it. So just two very quick comments for me. One of them is, this is like a moving kind of theories and practical and how do you achieve it. And the information out there is truly sometimes, doesn't matter how many times you read it, completely out of our heads. So I would say that one of the best tools that we can do, and you're doing already with the seminars and things like that, is how do we compress it and make how do you say, the dumbest guide to this platform? Because we as ambassadors have to explain to our governments. And as you said before, the easiest answer is no, because they don't want to read, they don't have the time, or they don't care. So we truly need to put something in writing that is very small and very practical and very easy to understand. That would be one of my requests. And number two, we, as you know, say the private industry is, I think it's a must. Without it, it would be very difficult to have the kind of money and participation that you need.
The battery gone.
Sorry.
Your battery's gone.
Maybe it's telling me that I am talking too much, sorry. So private industry, I think, is very important. And I know that maybe it's very difficult to talk individually with each company. So are you considering maybe agencies like, for example, KITA or agencies like that will bring benefit to their organizations, right? KITA has, I think, 77,000 members. So maybe that would be like an approach that will be easier than rather to talk, to each individual company. So I will suggest that without the private industry, is not going to be enough. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those reflections. I mean, I have to reflect on the first one. I'm sorry, I'm going to, even though I'm not meant to be, I'm moderating, but I will say, we do feel in the carbon pricing unit here at GGGI that we have become expert slide writers on trying to work out how to, and we all said learning and development this year, maybe we ought to learn more about strategic communication, because what we are trying to do is pictorially or in any form of interesting way get across very complex, and we do understand it's very complex. For your private sector one, I'd like to, yes, the design of the carbon transaction platform does want to include private sector, but through the government, because only, and this is the crux of the matter, only parties to Article 6, parties to the Paris Agreement can trade. And our position is as advisor, trusted advisor to governments, but we fully appreciate your view. I think I'd like to get a little reflection maybe from Dida or Milan, if you'd like to respond on that, sort of how you have been thinking at all about private sector, bringing private sector in. Any thoughts on that, Dida?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Yeah, I think since the Paris Agreement has been agreed by all countries, the role of private sector is under state, because if the private sector want to sell or to buy the carbon, should approve by the government, because the corresponding adjustment we have to achieve first our NDCs, and if we still have a space or the amount of carbon credit that can be sold, we will ask the the buyer should ask the private sector to involve and to buy from the seller countries, for example, of Indonesia, and Indonesia will promote to the all private sector to contribute to do the mitigation, something like that.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, Pat Dida. Milan, any quick thoughts on private sector engagement? I know this has come up in Matt's program and elsewhere in Nepal, but anything you would like to respond on that?
Yes. Private sector is very much willing to come up with the various ideas referring to our NDCs. We have different activity targets, and mostly in the energy sector and the waste to energy, such kind of things. And private sector are very much willing to participate in am I still
on? Still hearing you? You okay? Can you hear us?
am I audible there?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, you're
thank you.
audible. Carry on.
So the private sector are very much proactive than the government, as previous speaker mentioned. So they are just exploring the ways how to invest in those kind of activities and how to participate in the carbon market. So as Excellency Jenny mentioned before, it is not, carbon market is not it is the matter of transaction. You need to build a kind of instruments and the governance before transacting anything. So we're just thinking of engaging the private sector both for the NDC compliance as well as the transaction. So we are thinking of various options, like maybe we already talked about the low-hanging fruits, like the investment, it's a high price or low price carbon investment, or maybe the quantified amount of, for example, certain percent of those emission reductions will be counted under the NDC compliance, and certain amount of those kind of emission reduction done by private sector will be transacted in the market. So those kind of things we're discussing here in the country. So that's my response for that. Pamela, back to you.
Thank you so much, Milan. Did we have something online, or should we stay in the room here? Do you want to switch a microphone on and just say what the question is?
So we have a question online from our team in Indonesia, actually, who says that in a meeting last week, the Vice Minister of Environment and Forestry in Indonesia mentioned his specific interest in policy approaches. So, Pak Dida, what kind of policy approach could it be of interest to Indonesia? Is the question.
I think we know the answer to that one, don't we, Pat Dida? It's our DAPA program.
Yeah, actually, that's what we are doing in DAPA program. So after several options of policy approach, we come up into the two options. First is the ETS, emission trading system. We just ran the pilot last year, but through our regulation should be mandatory this year. We have already a regulation in Indonesia. We have a government regulation of on economic instrument, and then last year we have a presidential regulation on carbon pricing, and we are also just published the new tax law, which of in the tax law is mentioned about carbon tax. So first, the policy approach is about emission trading system. The emission reduction of the emission trading system is potentially to be sell. And the second one is solar PV for the rooftop. These two is beyond our NDC, so this is very potential if we can do trade. And yeah, thanks to GGGI, they support the preparation of the readiness up to we ready to sell. But the decision whether Indonesia will sell or not after all the modalities ready put in place, so we negotiate with the buyer. But the engagement already started. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. And just quickly, I want to take a last round of questions to each other. So maybe, Milan, if I pass to you first, is there anything you would like to ask a potential fellow seller in the market or a potential buyer in the market? But Lee, do you have any questions for anyone?
Fennel, I couldn't hear you properly, so could you repeat once? The sound is not very good here. So.
Okay, that's better. Now I seem to have come back. Just needs to switch it off and switch it back on again. The usual thing. Okay, do you have any questions for any other members of the panel?
Okay, not a specific one, but yeah, at the moment, no.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. So I think either Pat Dida or Jenny, are there any questions you would like to ask each other as being potentially two sides of the market here?
Not a question, but we definitely want to work with Indonesia about climate change cooperation, including market mechanism. So we have a draft agreement, and then we are going to deliver the draft to you, and we can discuss. Because Korea has a plan to drastically expand climate change cooperation agreement with many countries. But I think, yes, this is rather about overall cooperation regarding climate change. So just carbon credit production, that's just a part of the cooperation. Instead, we really want to strengthen the moving of technology, investment, and know-how. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm going to allow only one panel member to do the whole wrapping up. Otherwise, the room is going to get very angry with me because Frank has only got 2 minutes to do the final wrap and there's drinks outside. So Paktida or Milan, Paktida, maybe if I ask you for a couple of just final words, just to wrap up the thoughts of carbon transaction platform, carbon being transformational, a route to transformational change.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to respond, Jenny first. Yeah, I look forward to our cooperation in the future, in the near future. Yeah, as my colleague already mentioned this afternoon, yeah, we're very welcome with the platform. I think we have to, yeah, for Indonesia itself, of course, we have to have some discussion with our colleague from the line ministers. But yeah, of course, if we through this platform will gain more benefit for not only for Indonesia, but all countries, either for the seller or buyer. I think it's a good idea. And then we have to, to try to build, to develop together for both sides, for the sellers, for the buyers. And of course, we hope the GGGI can accommodate and make this platform win-win situation for all of us. Thank you.
I certainly like that phrase, win-win, and I hope we've established a long-standing new relationship on transformational change between the countries. I would like to take this opportunity, therefore, to thank my panelists very, very much for coming along. It's so lovely. I know, Milan, we're so upset you couldn't be here in person, but it's so lovely to start returning, in a way, to in-person activities. So with this, I'll pass over to Frank to close.
We'll make it very brief because the clock behind you, Fenella, is that we're already 3 minutes over time rather than ahead. So yeah, exactly. It's very easy to be on not exactly on the same page, as you see, and that happens a lot. But I think we had some great comments. Rodrigo, thank you for sharing that. Yes, this is very complex material, and it can be easy to not be quite informed of all the aspects of it. We're very aware of that. That is one of the reasons why indeed we have a pretty strong program that we'd love to expand. And I think our panel members have made it very clear that it's not just carbon transactions on their own. They're part of a much larger package of technology transfer, of larger climate change cooperation. And indeed, as Jenny indicated, Korea is looking to have those kind of agreements with many more countries. And we know other buying countries are in a similar position. So this is a very active market, even though it hasn't really started yet. So that, I think, is exactly the reason for organizations like our own to be involved and to try and figure out what is the best way to support our members, both buying and selling. So thank you for giving all your ideas through the survey, through the consultations and so on. And hopefully we've identified a very interesting activity for GGGI in the years to come. We're only 10 years old, and in the room next door, we're about to celebrate that. So we hope that most of you will have a chance to stay with us for a little while and to join us for our 10-year anniversary reception. There we'll do a super short summary of the sessions we've had here in that session for all the other participants who couldn't come to this webinar. So you'll get a little bit of a summary there as well. But for now, let me just thank you again for being in the room or being online and engaging with us in this global event on the carbon transaction platform. Thank you.